Hi, everyone. I'm Colleen Benelli, and here on our Reiki Lifestyle podcast with Robyn Benelli and our absolutely wonderful guest, Donald T. McMahon. Welcome, Donald T.
Thank you. Thank you.
Glad you're here. And Robyn. Hi, Robyn.
Hello. Hello, everyone. And hi, Donald T.
Hey, Robyn. Nice without the glasses.
Well, and we are really fortunate. We just spent a bunch of time with Don at the International Reiki Retreat in Sedona over Labor Day in September. So we're really excited to be here with you again today and to get to spend this time with you and to talk about your story. And, I've known you, 15, 20 years now, and long time.
22.
Yeah. And so, I've always just loved listening to you and Pam, and you guys have lived such an extraordinary life in this incredible time in humanity. And I just feel like I learned so much from you, and also your storytelling is just fascinating and fun, and of course your beautiful friendship as well. So I do want to mention today that today is September 11th. And Don, did you want to say anything about that?
I had just mentioned earlier that I have a friend, Joey Morelli, who was one of the 9/11 first responders that day, who was actually in the building watching the second one come down. And as a veteran, I always try and give him a call and or a text or something, and just check in, see how we're doing with this particular anniversary. It's always a powerful thing. It always brings up such emotion and such feeling. And so I just like to check in, just like with all the other veterans. And he's a particular one for this day.
Well, and thank you. And thank you. And, that's one thing that you've always done at the beginning of your concerts. For everyone listening, Don and Pam have been musicians and played together for 56 years. And he and they were both the ceremonial singers at the Reiki retreat for all different reasons, bringing in the energy of Reiki through their song and always sharing with us in our gratitude ceremony and so many other blessings that we've gotten to spend time together. But one thing that I know is that since we are speaking of veterans, is that it has always been your tradition to honor the veterans at the beginning of your prayers.
Yes. When I first came back, of course, being a Vietnam veteran, when I first came back, it was just a terrible thing. And for more than 10 years, I never let anybody know that I was a veteran. And it was the Lakota Sioux and Mescalero Apache that brought me into a powwow and actually started my process of healing and coming back from all that. And what they taught me at that time was that any time that you are playing music or having ceremony, for that matter, that the very first thing you do is honor Great Spirit. You honor God and generally place the medicine staff. And the second thing that you always do is to thank the veterans. The Native Americans really treasure veterans and the willingness to serve and the willingness to be a warrior. And so ever since then, ever since that time, every time we would play a concert or do anything like that, I would always, offer the first song to Creator. And I would always ask if there's anybody out in the audience who's a veteran and furthermore of families of veterans, because I began to realize what a stress and painful thing it was for my parents and for Pam. And all of our loved ones when we were away doing that, and there was nothing anybody could do except just wait. And so I always do that. And veterans are never far from my mind. It was funny. And here I go. See, what happens is I'll just start talking. On my flight back, this time from the Reiki retreat, I left at Phoenix to come into Charlotte, North Carolina. And when I got on the plane, the row that I was sitting in, I had managed to get an aisle seat in case I needed it. And it turns out that the guy sitting in the window seat had on a Vietnam veterans hat. I mean, out of the entire plane, here's the guy in the other seat with an empty seat between us with a Vietnam veterans hat on. And so when I got into my seat, and it ended up that the middle seat was empty. So when I got in my seat, most of the time I travel incognito with long hair and my hippie look. And so not that many people just know right off the bat that I'm also a Vietnam vet. And so I said to him, when I saw his hat, I said, "Oh yeah, who are you with?" And he told me who he was with. And I said, "Well, I was with the 25th Infantry Division." And he said, "Oh yeah, you were at such," and we started off talking, and it ended up the 3.5-hour flight back. We just ended up talking the entire way and had a great time. And the flight attendant came by and he made a point, because he had been on that same plane, I guess, since California. And he made a point of telling the flight attendant, says, "Oh, this guy over here is a veteran too." And I said, "Yeah, I just don't have a hat." And she said, "Well, you need to get you a hat, because that's how you get all the free stuff." And so I said, "Well, okay, I'm going to get me a hat then after this." And so he told me where to go get a hat, and all that stuff. But it was really good. And so I try and catch veterans wherever I can. And at least all I have to say is, who'd you serve with and when did you serve? And then when they ask, then we can strike up a conversation. And there's a level of brotherhood that it doesn't matter whether you're a redneck guy or a hippie guy or a whatever. We have this bond and we can begin to talk. And it was a great thing. So yes, I try and honor the veterans at every opportunity, especially on a day like 9/11, where so many of the first responders, my friend who's a survivor of that, he's suffered with a lot of cancer and a lot of health issues because of being in that environment. And most all of his friends are already gone, just like mine are as well. And so it's just important to connect and remind ourselves and them that they matter. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. And it is important. And, particularly for those of us that were not in all of it. I was a little bit, actually, Robyn, husband Robyn, for those of you listening, my husband's Robyn, my daughter's Robyn. But he was actually the first year that the draft was abolished. He turned 18 that year. So, and I was 2 years younger than him. So I was right in that transition time. And I think that, to me, a lot of times that part of history is not as acknowledged as it could be in today's world, because what a significant time to move from that requirement of young men to be drafted and go to war, and being a part of that history, because we were already dating. And I was 16 and when he turned 18, and wondering, is he going to be called to Vietnam? And that whole process that is such a I think of our son, that first generation of young men being raised, that wasn't a requirement for them. And
I talked to lots of both veterans, and whenever I say that I was a combat veteran in 1969, then a lot of guys who, for whatever reason, didn't get called or ended up right after the draft ended, they all start to tell me, how they didn't get drafted, as if it was something that they wish they could have done. And I go, oh, no. Really, thank you for not being drafted. You're very fortunate not to have been drafted. So it's, in some ways, I'm glad the draft is over. And then there's other ways that I wish there was some kind of a national service ability to do something, because the whole point of all that is being part of something bigger than yourself, and being and starting to learn that there's, and that's one of the reasons the Native Americans emphasize veterans so much, is learning how to offer yourself in service for the bigger thing. And I think without some level of national service, back then it was, your choice was either go in the Army or the Peace Corps. And of course, to join the Peace Corps back then, you really had to already be a college graduate. And I got drafted out of my senior year because of my political activities, let's put it that way. And so I was just in there. But there is something that sticks with me from being able to be in service, to be able to offer your life in service to the bigger whole. And it's a powerful thing. And it works itself in a whole bunch of different ways. And again, in the book, there's a lot about it, about how, my 40-year process of being able to somehow work with that and incorporate it into my life story and make it work, rather than have it be some level of shame or guilt or hidden thing. And I wish there was some way, because I know that my kids have grown up in a time, and I have 4 sons, and I certainly was not going to let them be drafted. I certainly wasn't. I registered them as conscientious objectors. And I had friends back in the 60s that were conscientious objectors, who basically spent 3 years in prison because they refused to go in the draft. And other ones that were, as soon as they said they were conscientious objectors, they just drafted them anyway and put them in the medical corps, which was kind of a harsh thing. But so I was thankful that my kids didn't have to serve in that way. But in some ways, I wish they had to do something in terms of service to the greater whole. It really is a character building thing, and it makes you find your spot in the great business of the whole world.
Well, you mentioned your book, and part of that is, as we said before, this is always just conversational, and we never know where the conversation's going to go. And so I want to hold up your book. And this is the book, The First 60 Days, a memorial of eternal love and the grief that, and the grief that follows.
Yes.
So this book, one of the reasons we wanted to have Don on is to share about his book and just this beautiful expression of, again, your extraordinary life. And with Pam, his wife of 56 years, or you were singing for 56 years. Were you actually married 56 years?
No, married for 52 years. There was a tumultuous first 4 years there that in and out. And again, you need to read the book to really find out, because it's complicated.
I was going to say.
We were married for 52 years, but we were together for 56 years. Yes, singing for 56 years. And again, I had fallen in love with her when I was 8 years old. So there's a whole period in there too.
Well, I just reread that part of the book and that part of your story, and how you saw her dancing in the park when you were 8 years old, hiding behind the bushes, just already in love.
Well, and it wasn't really love. It was, it was a recognition is the only way I can figure out how to put it. I recognized her from somewhere in the etheric world or something. I mean, I didn't know anything about that at that point, but and the closest thing I could think was an angelic presence, which is kind of over the top, but that's what it seemed like. And it was so overwhelming that, yes, I hid behind a bush and I watched her. And she was actually on these skates called rocket skates, which were long early precursors to inline skates. They just had two big round wheels on them, but it meant that she could dance like she was on ice skates. And so, yeah, that's when I first saw her. And then knew about her from then on until we finally actually began to have an interpersonal relationship later on.
Well, and that's what this book is also about. So let me just kind of share a little bit about the book too.
I'm gonna say, yeah, Colleen, why don't you go ahead and read the bio and make sure that we have the name of the book, because most of our people are listeners, so that people know what we're talking about.
Right.
Oh, so they may not see us on here, huh? They may be just listening.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Well, and the book, Donald's book, is The First 60 Days, a memorial of eternal love and the grief that follows. So Donald T. McMahon is a dear friend of ours, and he is loved by many. And he has a beautiful love story to share with us all. And it's in this book. Also, his extraordinary life with Pam. Sometimes I just feel like you lived so many of the historical moments in this age that, is also chronicled in the book. But anyway, he is a Reiki Master, which is where I met him and Pam quite a few years ago at Reiki retreats, Reiki classes. And we've done a lot of things together over the years. And he is a singer and a songwriter. And of course, he and Pam have been ceremonial singers for our gratitude ceremony and other ceremonies, aside from us. And I'd like to just share a little bit about what that means, because being a ceremonial singer is more than just singing the songs that go with the ceremony. It's actually delivering the energy of the ceremony through the song. And with him and with Pam, always infusing it with Reiki energy, and the songs with Reiki energy, and the gift that brings to the people during the ceremony. So I've always been honored to have them share their gifts with me, and this year with Don, and last year with Don by himself, because Pam died suddenly and unexpectedly in February of 2022. And, it changed his life. And all of us, of course, miss her terribly. She was loved by so many. And that was one of the things that Don discovered, even though, he's expressed that he knew how loved she was. But after she passed, it really came into full focus for him when he realized that he needed to share what was taking place in their lives and around her, and to make sure that her story was being told accurately. So he actually went to her Facebook page. She had an active Facebook page, which is still active, Pam McMahon, and that's McMahon, so Pam McMahon. And they had been singing on another Facebook page called the Porch of, or they'd been sharing the Porch of Peace on their Facebook page. So anyway, Don just decided that he would share what was happening to get the information to so many people on her Facebook page. And suddenly he found himself just channeling each day with a new post, just their story. And so as he kept sharing their story, so many people commented on how much it was making a difference for them in their own lives through their own process of grief. Sometimes just not always about their own process of grief, but I know for myself, and of course in my loss with Pam, but also just the beauty of their story. And frankly, Don, the beauty of your writing was just so exceptional. So his posts were so powerful. We all just kept saying, this needs to be compiled. We need to make sure this gets saved. And then you can tell how the book actually got published. And this is, again, the book of these Facebook posts, which are more than about just his grief, but their story together, which, again, when you hear him talk about it, they really have participated and lived so much of the history of this time, that it's just endlessly fascinating. Even the other day at the Reiki retreat, and oh my gosh, I just had word recall, Jimmy Buffett, when Jimmy Buffett just passed away. And you just casually talked about how, well, one day when Jimmy and I were talking, and all these years, I never knew you were friends with him. And that's just another example of your storytelling and your songwriting. And Earl. Earl.
I always
today you have to share a little bit about Earl too.
I always describe you kind of like, you guys are like Forrest Gump, where not you as him, but the way that movie is written, where through his life, it tells the story of a time period. Even you just talking before just now about, your experience as a vet, and it's like even that, and then how it contributed or how it connected to 9/11. And I have to say, as a person that was a part of following along your Facebook posts, it was like we all processed our grief, our collective grief. And I know there's more of that for people that, knew you guys more intimately. But even still, all of us, through your words and through your history and through your storytelling, is just hanging on those words. And it went into that part of it even more. That is just the history of that time period was just, and then channeling Pam through it and channeling yourself. It was really extraordinary, still is, because you're still telling your story, and you're still, all these different things, even like your story about your flying back on the plane. I read that on Facebook, and it really is just, it's extraordinary.
Well, it's an extraordinary thing that happened to me, not just the fact that Pam passed unexpectedly like that, which certainly rocked my world from the bottom up. You can't spend 56 years of your life, and we were like really close. Yeah. We worked together, we sang together, we had our children together, we stayed together. We hardly ever slept apart. There are only a couple times in our entire 56-year relationship that we were actually apart anytime. And it's a powerful thing to live with somebody that close for that long and be that intimately connected. It really is like being the same person. I said to people, like after she passed, for all those years, we were Pam and Don, one word, Pam and Don. Mm-hmm. And then when she left and it just became Don, this process was me, and I'm still in it, trying to figure out who I am. Because when she died, I guess we'll get into that later, but she died extremely suddenly, and unexpectedly. She was dancing and singing, and then 3 seconds later, she was gone. And when I say 3 seconds, I'm not really exaggerating. I'm saying she was gone. And at the time, I perceived it as a frequency hop. I mean, it was hitting me in my heart and in my consciousness as the fact that, holy crap, she's actually dying. But I could see in that moment that it was just like an electron moving from one shell to another. She was just frequency hopping onto another frequency. But at any rate, it happened so suddenly that it kind of threw me off my game, to say the least. And what Colleen was talking about was, I mean, I had no Facebook presence. I had no social media presence at all, because for over 50 years, I've been an IT consultant. And the last thing I wanted to do was be on Facebook or any kind of social media. Now, I would voyeur on Pam's, and when she did her Porch of Peace broadcasts, which I'll explain a whole lot more here in a minute, then I would basically be in the control room like Robyn, making sure the sound and everything was right while she was doing that, because she would go into channel and channel meditations and channels stuff there, and she wouldn't know what she was doing. So I would be in the control room. But when she passed that quickly and that unexpectedly like that, the next day, my kids and we had 4 sons together, and they were here. And the next morning, as the sun came up, my kids came to me and said, "Pop, you've got to get on her page and tell people that the rumors are true, and tell them what happened, because they are guessing at things and stuff is flying around." So I got on. I said, well, I don't really know how to do this. So I went to her page, and the first thing that I knew how to do was to press that little record button that's down at the bottom to make a comment. And I just went blah, 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 blah. This is, I can't even remember what I said, but I said something about, yes, it's true. Pam did die last night. And there's not, and when we can't really talk about it because nobody has a voice right now. So please don't call. And then that was that. Then I just undid that and just let it go. And so the next day, my kids came back to me and said, no, Pop, you got to do more than that, because now some people are saying it was a heart attack. Some people are saying it was this and that and the other. You need to go out there and tell them what actually happened. So I went back on again and did the little record button, and I explained the actual, medical condition that caused her to do this frequency hop. And it's funny, when somebody dies, you try not to use the die word. Yeah. You try and use every other kind of word you can, like she passed, or, frequency hopped, or she just left her body. You try all sorts of different words. You just don't want to use the die word. And so I was careful about that, but I was explaining the process and the physical process that caused her to leave her body. And I was totally unprepared for the wave of responses that came back, because I knew that she was doing this Porch of Peace broadcast and had been doing it for several years. Every Tuesday night she would do it, even when she was ill and stuff. She would still go out there and do her Porch of Peace broadcast. And when the pandemic came along, she had taken a pause, but when the pandemic came along, she said, I really need to do this. People need this. So she went back and started doing the Porch of Peace broadcast again. And so this tidal wave of communications that came back at me when I made that second post were just overwhelming. It was just overwhelming, the thousands of things that came in, because people were saying, oh, you've helped me through the whole pandemic period. I wouldn't have made it without those Porch of Peace broadcasts. I look forward to them, and all these things like that. And I just had no idea that it was as large as it was. And these were people from all over the world that were doing this. Of course, technology. And so the third day, and all these thousands of of comments that were coming in, there were two common things that most people said. One was, they said, please tell us something about your life together. please tell us how you met, tell us something about your life. And the other one was, tell us how it is that you can have a 56-year a monogamous relationship for 56 years and be as happy as you two are together. And people used to ask us that a lot at different conferences and different things. But when I saw those come in from all these people from all over the world, I just sat down and started writing. I started trying to answer their question. And it was just amazing, because I didn't honestly know what I was doing. I still don't know what I'm doing, but I would just sit down and begin to write. And in the beginning, I was doing it on Notepad on an old laptop that I had. And I would just take it, I would sit down, and the words would just come out. I would just be typing and typing and typing, and the words would come out, and then it would stop. And I would do the old Control A, Control C, and then go to Facebook and do a Control V. And then I would forget about it, because I didn't know what I had just written. I literally did not know what I had just written. And then I'd get all these comments back. And in the beginning, even with the comments, there were so many coming that I couldn't answer them. But what Pam used to do was at least put a little heart there so that people would know that she had read it, that she had gone and read it. And so I was doing that, and some of them I would try to answer, but a lot of them, they would be quoting stuff that I said in this post, and I didn't know what it was. And in the beginning, I could not emotionally go back and read what I had read. I just couldn't do it. And that went on for months, actually, because it became, I wasn't sleeping, literally wasn't sleeping hardly at all. And so I would be up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I would walk in and grab the computer and allow these words to spill out, and then just post them and then forget about them. But it started to happen every day. And it became a habit of getting up and sitting there and waiting on something to come out on this page. And it was probably, a long time into it when people started asking me about compiling these and keeping track of them. But there was so much that caught me off guard. There were people sending me these comments saying how it was helping them process grief that they had been trying to process for years and years and years and couldn't do it. And at some point in there, I realized, that I had pulled open my overcoat, and I wasn't wearing anything under it. I was exposing myself completely to whoever these people are out there in the Facebook land, and I couldn't stop. But I wanted it to be authentic. I wanted what I was saying there to be authentic. And at some point, actually shortly after it started, in reference to what you were saying about it being a historical record and a chronology of the times, somewhere in there, it shifted into that, because I also wanted to bear witness to what I've seen in my life. And I think it's really important. One of the things I've learned is that it is really important that everybody bear witness to what they have seen. Bear witness to what you actually are seeing, not some fantasy thing, but what's actually going on in your life, and let people know, be a witness. And it just kept going. It's still going on. I took the first, and where the title came from, it really isn't the first 60 days. It's the first 60 days of posts that I did, which actually cover a longer period of time than 60 days. But I finally reached a point where I felt like I had sort of told the story. I had tried to keep it as short as I could. Well, that's not true. I didn't try at all. It just formed itself into these little bits that would fit on Facebook. But I got to the end of, to the part of explaining what actually happened the night she passed. And it felt like I just put bookends on it. I put a bookend on the beginning, and now I have reached a bookend on the end. And I think I said somewhere in there, I said, well, you asked these questions, and I've tried to tell you, and now you probably know more than you wanted to, but you know what it is now. You know our lives. And there were these wonderful people, several people out there actually, who had been taking, because at that point, I had never gone back to read anything that I had written from the beginning all the way to the end of those first 60 days. I wouldn't go back and read it. But there were people out there, several people. One was particularly an editor down at the University of South Carolina who had taken everything that I wrote and put it in a format and copyrighted it for me and all that stuff. And when I got to the end of that and said, they took that to mean that I was finished posting. And I had several people send it to me in a Word document form saying, this needs to be made in a book and don't change anything about it. Leave it just like it is and turn it into a book. And so, but what happened was that I couldn't stop this voice. I had never written anything before in my life other than, the songs that I've written. And I went back and started looking, and I've written some poetry back in college and stuff. But I intentionally avoided classes where I had to write a paper because I hated writing. I hated writing any kind of prose. And so I had never, ever, ever written anything before. And this turned out to be something that was giving me an outlet for what was happening inside. And so when I got to the end of the 60 days, I kept writing. And now I'm up to over 400 posts that I now have that I'm trying to figure out what to do with after this, because there's a lot of really good stuff in there. It's so much of the comments and stuff are confidential and things that I can't really and wouldn't talk about publicly here. But the weight of the responsibility, I mean, I can tell you that there are hundreds of people have written me and said, I read your posts every single morning with my breakfast. I read them while we're having, my husband and I read them while we're having coffee and we talk about it. And I look forward to it every day. Please don't stop. And I got a lot, I mean, just hundreds of those. And so I have a recording engineer where we've done our CDs, and he was kind of overwhelmed with it. And he said, this is a book. Just stop what you're doing and put this into a form. I just put it into book form. Don't do anything. Just put it into book form. But furthermore, what I want you to do, I want you to record yourself reading this book, because it needs to be an audio book. Everybody needs to hear you actually read these things. Well, that's great. But, and I want to do that. That is part of my next project. But I mean, you see what happened to Colleen trying to read the title, right? So here it was 6 months after I into this thing, and I still had not gone back to read anything that I had written. Now, there are these wonderful, wonderful women in Kentucky where we had done a lot of breath work and a lot of Reiki work. And they had taken that, they had also had collected all those writings into a Word document, and they made them into a book. They actually, made it a book, and they even put a picture of Pam in the front, and they made a leather bound cover for it, a hand tooled leather cover with a clasp and stuff, and they mailed that to me. And they even put on, infused into the leather, they put her favorite essential oil. They put that in the book. Whew. So when it came, I mean, it was overwhelming when I actually opened the box and I saw that it was there. And I knew what it was. and I hadn't read it yet. So I closed it up and put it by my bedside on my little night table beside the bed. And when my recording engineer kept bugging me about recording it, I said, I haven't even read it. And the first thing I have to do is to be able to read it. If I'm going to read it and record it out loud, I have to be able to read it. So I finally, after 6 months, I sat down and I would start to read, and I would read the first couple of paragraphs, and I'd become so emotional I had to stop. So it took me a long time to get through reading the book. And now I've read it 10 or 12 or 15 times. And I'm doing my best to get my voice together so that I can actually record it and read it without having the emotion well up. Because I'm finding in reading it that it is actually, I come back and I go, wow, who wrote this? This is really good. Yeah. And I don't even recognize a tremendous amount of it. I recognize the story because it's my life and Pam's life, but the way it's written feels like somebody else wrote it. And that's still going on. Well, let me stop for a second. Ask me a question.
Well, you started with share about your life together, how you met, and how you did have a 56-year love relationship. So how about if you just start at the beginning of your story with Pam, and that's what the book is also about, is, again, the times of the 60s. You guys were really, truly the authentic hippies and lived that life and continued to be authentic with those values and teachings and way of life. So, wherever you feel like you want to start, about sharing your story.
I just want to really quick try to convey to our listeners who haven't met you and didn't meet Pam and know you together as well. When he talked about you being one, I think unless you have met you, maybe now listening to you to this or reading your book, that like how extraordinary, you don't meet people like you very often in this life, and how extraordinary, first of all, you are as people, and Pam was as a woman, but then your relationship as well. When he says that they really did have this, rare love that it's like, it is out of a movie. It is out of, like, you're showered in it when you're with you. And it is almost like a couple that you meet once in a lifetime. And this is coming from, long-term relationship for me. My parents have long-term, I'm around a lot of long-term relationships, and their relationships are beautiful and all of that. So I don't even meet it. So I'm used to seeing that and experiencing that. And you and Pam, really, your love for each other and your relationship really was as extraordinary, and trying to convey that to our listeners. It's like, no, really, this was like a movie type of love and a movie type of relationship that you don't come across very often.
Thank you. And as this goes on, I'm realizing that more and more and more, even than I did when we were together. And all I can say is, I've just been graced. This is just, and I think I said at the Reiki retreat, I was just a redneck hippie guy, and Pam was this beautiful dancer and singer and stuff. And how we actually hooked up had to be a past life and just the grace of God, because otherwise we were just so different in our character and our lives and the way we looked at life. And it took a long time for me to come around to be who I am now. People used to ask, Pam, mostly Pam, because Pam did all the talking before now. Now I'm the one doing all the talking. But before she died, she was the one who did all the talking because she was so eloquent and she could put words, the perfect words, to whatever the circumstance was. And she could answer people's questions succinctly and perfectly.
And she was really funny.
Yeah. Oh yeah, she had a sense of humor. And I would just sit back and be amazed. And I said back in the time, I just assist her. That's my job, is to assist her. And I remember at one point, Michael, really early on there, he said, well, we're going to change that, which is how I became a Reiki teacher. But we were it's just an amazing thing. And the longer I analyze and I work with the story that I keep telling, the more I realize how extraordinary it actually was and is, for that matter. But as you know, and you were mentioning like a movie script. Okay. So ever since we were going to spiritual conferences and stuff, and we would tell these stories, because someone would say, well, gosh, how did you guys meet? Well, that starts a whole cascade of things that goes on and on and on and on until today. And at some of these conferences, we'd be sitting around like we do, and they would ask me about, or ask Pam how we got started, how we met each other, and we'd start telling that. And then we come back at the next meal and sit down, and they say, okay, well, you were here. What happened next? And then eventually the retreat would be over. We'd come back the next year, and the people would come in and say, okay, here's where you were then. What happened next? And all of them were saying, like you just did, this is like a movie script. This needs to be made into a movie. Okay. Well, after Pam died and I started writing this stuff and started hearing all this feedback, I contacted one of my surrogate sons, who is now a screenwriter in Hollywood. And I said, I want you to read this stuff and tell me what you think. And this was before I had put it together all together as a book. This was when there was parts of it in there. And there's a part in the book, and I'll explain more later, I guess, where actually Pam and I had sort of split up because I had been drafted. I had been sent to Vietnam, and I was in Vietnam. And while I was there, we were definitely not together. And I was really angry about the way all that happened. And just getting angrier with not only with Pam, but with everybody. But there was a moment where I came into a little club in a place in Vietnam. And up on above the bar, there was a little tiny black and white TV. And right at that instant, when I sat down with my beer, here comes Pam dancing on the Ed Sullivan Show with the band that was playing there.
Really?
Yes, really, for real. Now, and your reaction is perfect, because my friend, the screenwriter, he said, Donald T., if I presented this to a producer, they're never going to believe this. He said, are you kidding me? You were in Vietnam and you came in and saw her on, because there's not replay or anything. This had to be the exact instant. You saw her on TV, on the Ed Sullivan Show while you were in Vietnam. And I said, yes, absolutely. I'm not making this up. That's the truth. He said, they're never going to believe that. That can't be real. Well, it turned out about a month ago that I located that little clip where Pam was dancing on the Ed Sullivan Show. I didn't think he asked me at the time, he said, well, can't you go to CBS and get go in the archives and get that piece and stuff? And I said, when you go into doing that, it's very expensive and I don't even know how to find it and all that stuff. Well, it turns out that I was doing a post, and the name of the band she was playing with was called Your Father's Mustache. And they're like a banjo band, and it's like a regular kind of enterprise where there's one in New York City and there's one in Chicago and there's one in Los Angeles. And, but she was in the New York one, and they always did the opening warm-ups for the Ed Sullivan Show. And then one time a year, Ed Sullivan would actually put them on, let them be, open the show, and they would be on the screen. And that's what I witnessed. So I was writing a post probably a month or 6 weeks ago, and I mentioned something about your father's mustache. And somebody then posted a little clip of your father's mustache band playing on Ed Sullivan Show in 1975 or 74, 75. Well, that wasn't her. But I said, well, gosh, I just wonder. And so on the Miracle of Miracles, I went to Google and I typed in your father's mustache, Ed Sullivan, 1969. And it came up on the screen. And there she was dancing. And it's old and scratchy, the stuff, the images that are on there. And she's only on there for about 3 or 5 seconds right in the beginning of it, but she's unmistakably there. And so part of the reason that I put pictures in the book is because a lot of William is William Rand, when I'd be telling him, or we would be telling him some of these stories, he would say, holy crap, do you guys have pictures of any of this stuff to make sure that it's, you're not just making this up? And what we told William then was, we don't know if we have pictures. We never took pictures of one another, but fortunately there were other people who did. They took some pictures of us at different times, and I included some of them in the book. Some of which are absolutely extraordinary, like the cover photo. And
the cover is, I'm going
if I could put
it up again real quickly, because
if I could put in a plug for the guy who did that, his name is J. Thomas Lopez, and he's like an internationally famous photographer who is an old dear friend of ours, and he's taken photographs of us from back in the 70s up until that photograph that's on the cover of the book, and one or two of Pam that are inside the book, where
that one of Pam.
Yeah, those were some of the last photographs that were taken of her before she died. And so, I mean, his page and everything is worth going to look at, J. Thomas Lopez. But I'm forever thankful. And in the process of doing this book, I called him up to ask him permission to use those photographs, actually for her celebration of life. And I caught him in New York in intermission at some show, some Broadway show, and I explained what I wanted to do. And he said, "Oh yeah, you can use those photographs for anything you want to do." He said, "You have all the rights you want. You just use them however you want." Well, when I got ready to do the book, I felt compelled to get back in touch with him and ask him for written permission before I actually put them in the book. And he said, "Look," he said, "you've really done me a favor because of asking for those. I've gone back into my archives and I've looked up, and I've got a bunch of you and some other people and stuff that were taken through there." And he said, "Those portraits are kind of what launched my career." He said, "What I want to do," he said, "what I'm going to do is transfer ownership of these photographs to you. That way," and some of those photographs, especially that one of her with her eyes closed, are in museum exhibits in Barcelona and United Arab Republic and in Germany somewhere. Anyway, several. That one is on display in a bunch of different cities right now. But so he gave me ownership of those so that I could put them in here and feel good about them. Now, I don't even know.
Back to the Ed Sullivan Show in Vietnam.
Yeah, and so he said to me, he said, "Nobody's ever going to believe that." He said, I can't, give the script to a producer because they're just going to think you're making this up. And so that kind of went to bed for a long time. Well, now they're on, now they're on the writer's strike right now. And he just got the book itself instead of just partial posts. And he said, "Well, we're on writer's strike right now, but as soon as the writer's strike is over, I will take this and present it to some producers that I know." He said, "This is phenomenal. We need, something but we have to decide what format whether it's a movie or whether it's a series or whether it's a something else. So I don't know, with the way all that stuff goes, you just let it go and see what happens. It's out there now. Now, I'll try and do this as shortly and as quickly as I can, because I know we have a certain amount of time limit.
Don, we're going to be like your retreat buddies. Come back. We'll remember and come back to where you left off.
let's see what the interest level is. Let's put it that way, because that's where I'm at right now. I managed to, and the only reason the book got published is because I ended up getting a stomach virus that had me not wanting to be very far away from the bathroom for about a week. So I decided to use that time to finish editing and go through the whole process and get it assembled and actually get it out there and get it published. And so I really have to thank the rotavirus or whatever that was that went through for making it work. But after I did that, I decided I want to see what kind of reception it gets, whether there's enough interest for me to go further. Because I have these other projects, the other 400 posts that follow this. And I will probably go ahead and do the audiobook now. That's what I want to work on next and actually get that out. But it depends on the interest. And like on your podcast here, I'm willing to talk forever, but it depends on whether anybody's actually wants to listen. I end up talking to the mirror sometimes, and stuff, but it's probably more appropriate if people actually, if there's an interest to listen to what I'm saying. Now, our story started with me seeing her when I was 8 years old. She was actually 9. I like older women. What can I say? And she lived on a 1,500 acre state park that was outside of the city of Columbia, South Carolina. And I lived in the suburbs in Columbia, South Carolina. We went to 2 entirely different schools. Pam went to a school that was a 1 through 12 school, 1st grade to 12th grade. She graduated from there. And her mother was the school secretary. So she was always under supervision all the time. She was a good girl. She had dance classes. Her mother kept her busy so that she couldn't get into trouble. I, on the other hand, was kind of the opposite. I started playing music, or I started singing with my mother's trio when I was 4 years old. My mother her mother and her 2 sisters were a singing group called the Corley Sisters, and they sang 3-part real tight harmonies like McGuire Sisters or Andrews Sisters and stuff like that. And they did a lot of USO, because when I was 4 years old, it was right after the end of World War II, and there were a lot of returning veterans and stuff. And so they did all of these USO shows, and they had a lot of performances, and they had me up on the stage singing when I was 4 years old. And then when I went to Catholic school, the nuns pulled me out right off the bat and said that I had piano fingers. And so every day they took me out of class for an hour or so and taught me classical piano, which I then rebelled against and just stopped doing that. But then I started playing drums in different kinds of bands when I was about 13 or 14 years old, which meant that I started drinking alcohol when I was 13, and I started smoking cigarettes when I was 13 years old, playing in these groups. And if Pam were here, she would say that I was a bad boy. And that's one of the things that attracted her to me, was that I was the bad boy. And I was always getting into trouble. And she could see that from this other school. I was one of the bad boys from over there. And I really wasn't a bad boy. I just, had some bad habits. But in playing in those bands, I was playing in country bands in the Southeast, where you literally, I started playing at 13, but by 14 or 15, I I was playing in a lot of clubs that literally had chicken wire up in between the bandstand and the people in the audience. You see jokes about that, with the Blues Brothers and stuff because of all the broken glass and the fights that break it. I played in a lot of those clubs and I modeled a lot of that behavior. Let me put it that way. But by the time I got to college, I found, and I was playing in all sorts of groups past that, not just country bands, but I started playing in rock bands and jazz bands and different kind of things. And so by the time I got to college, I discovered that I really liked the theater. I liked, acting. And later on, I learned about directing and technical work and everything. So I switched my degree when I went to college from biology to theater arts. And when I was 19, I had the starring role in a play called Dark of the Moon, which is a story, oddly enough, about an Appalachian witch boy who falls in love with a human. And it had a large cast, and a lot of the people in the cast were not skilled at the theater stuff. So they didn't know how to do makeup and stuff. And so we needed some help. Well, Pam did theater work at another theater down the road, a few blocks away. And so the word went out that we needed help with makeup. And if there was anybody down there that could come up and help, they would appreciate it. And Pam, always willing to help, came up. And when she came in the door, that's when our current relationship actually started. When she walked in the door, our eyes met each other and we knew each other. We knew we were out there, but now we knew that we were soulmates, twin flames, however you want to do that. It's like an electrical thing that happens. And so we started talking in the course of the production there. And when that rehearsal was over, she asked if I needed a ride home. And I think I have said before, even if I had my car there, I would have said, yes, I need a ride home. If you're offering, I will definitely take a ride home. And so she drove me I was living with my parents, and she drove me to my parents' house, and we sat in her car and started talking. That was probably, it could be midnight by the time we got back to my parents' house, but we talked until the sun came up. It was like we had known each other for lifetimes and lifetimes. And I'm confident that that's actually true. Even though I can't remember them, I can feel it. I can feel this connection that goes off way, way, way long time ago. But we sat and talked the entire rest of the night. And when the sun came up, I asked her if she wanted to come into my house and meet my parents. And she said, well, isn't that kind of weird, coming in at daylight with a woman? And I said, not really. I said, my parents are pretty accustomed to it, so it'll be all right. And sure enough, she came in with me and had breakfast with us. And that started our serious relationship. And from that minute on, we really couldn't stand to be apart. We would, if she had to do laundry for her parents, I would go hang out with her at the laundromat and do laundry. And she taught me to fold clothes, not a fitted sheet, but she taught me how to fold clothes and do all that stuff. And we did all that just so we could keep talking. The conversation just kept on going. It was never ending. And the only problem was that she was engaged to somebody else at that point. And she had left college and come home, and the wedding date had already been set, but she was engaged to somebody else. But it didn't seem to matter at the time because he lived in Philadelphia and wasn't around. And I mean, we just had this intense, hot, heavy relationship that was everything except sexual. We did not have a sexual relationship at that point, which was unusual for me but not for her. And so we just had this really intense relationship going on. And every once in a while, this guy would come down from Philadelphia and they would go out to eat or something. And I would ask, or what's the scoop with this guy? Are we going to be together? And she just kept saying, don't worry about it. I'll work it out. Don't worry about it. We're it. And eventually I'm going to get rid of him. Well, long story short, that went on for probably 6 months. And then she came back from Philadelphia with a big fat engagement ring. And I was kind of really put off and said, well, this sure looks like you're going through with this. And I mean, you need to make a decision about whether it's me or him. And she said, well, I don't think I can get out of it. I think I'm going to have to marry him. And I said, well, I can't, there's no way I'm going to watch that. And so I packed up my guitar and I left town. I went to New York City because I just couldn't watch it. How deep do you want me to go into this, Colleen?
Go for it.
Yeah.
It just goes. So I was in New York, and that was the summer of 1966, the late summer leading into the fall. And actually, about this time of year, she was getting married to this other guy. Well, I was in New York, and my best friend at the time was up there with me, and his name was Donnie as well. And I was good Donnie, and he was bad Donnie. He had some bad habits, but so the day that Pam got married, my friend Donnie, unbeknownst to me, I didn't send him down there to do this, but when Pam was waiting to enter the church with her father, escorting her down there, and it was a big production because she was a dancer at the dance. She taught dancing for 15 years at the dance school. And I mean, all the dancers were there, the ballet, and, must have had 15 attendants and all that stuff. So it was a big production. And here she was in her wedding dress and getting ready to walk into the church to walk down the aisle. And my friend Donnie jumps out of the bushes and ran up to her and said, "You can't do this. You cannot do this. You're breaking Don's heart. He's up in New York right now, and I have 2 tickets to go to New York City right now. You just have to come with me and everything will work out." And her father got really upset and asked Pam if he needed to call the cops, because this guy, I mean, we were scruffy looking, we already had long hair, and actually I think we had beards at that point. But he just continued on. You really can't do this. Don's really upset. He's up there pining away, and you can't, it's wrong. You don't need to be doing this. You can get out of it right now. Here are the tickets, and I have some money I'll even give you if you'll just walk away with me right now. And anyway, finally, she just said to her father, "It's okay. I'll deal with it." And she told Donnie that she was not going to leave, that she was going to go through with the wedding. And what she told me, and this is always one of those things where I wish she were here to explain it in her words. But what she told me was she started walking down the aisle, realizing she was making the biggest mistake of her life while she was walking down there, and cried the whole time. And when you look at the picture in the book, I particularly picked that one because it's her crying in her wedding dress at the wedding. Because as I was going through the photographs for this book, I found her wedding album for her first wedding. Other people have said to me, "You aren't keeping that, are you?" And I said, "Oh yeah, got to keep that." And that reminds me of what actually happened. But so she got married, and I was in New York City playing in Greenwich Village every chance I could get to play, and really consuming a lot of alcohol, soothing my inner self with alcohol. And I think by then I was finally starting to learn to smoke pot too. But after she was married, I came back down, and and went back to school and assumed that that was just the end of that. I couldn't rationalize. I couldn't figure out how that could happen. But now she was married to another man and living in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania. And so I had to figure out some way to keep going. And I kept going to school, kept being in the theater program. And she stayed, and I started playing music at this coffee house called the UFO Coffee House, which was one of a series of coffee houses that had Phil Oakes and Jane Fonda came sometimes, and Howard Zinn was a big person who wrote stuff. And it was a coffee house in Columbia that counseled people who wanted to resist the draft, and would even counsel soldiers from Fort Jackson, which was a large basic training facility, would counsel them into how to get out of the Army if they wanted to and avoid going to Vietnam. And so I was like a house musician there. I played there every night pretty much. And that's why I really started to see how society was really coming unglued. Because the police would come into this coffee house. They would just pick random people and start hitting them with nightclubs, and push them up against the wall. And particularly the military police would come in and grab the soldiers and drag them out and stuff. And so I started seeing the whole thing coming unglued. But at one point, after about a year and a half, Pam called me up out of a clear blue sky and said, I'm running away from my husband. Will you pick me up at the airport? Well, would you? Yes, I would. As angry as I had been before, I said, absolutely, I'll pick you up. And I picked her up at the airport, and it was like we had never been apart. It was like the conversation with these people at the spiritual retreats, how it keeps on going. Well, we picked up with, whatever the next word was in the sentence that we had left off with a year and a half before. And so I brought her immediately back to the coffee house with me, and she walked right up on stage with me and started singing in the perfect harmonies that she always sang in, and that I still hear now. I mean, it's just like she fell right into it. And then we were back to being one thing again. Except that she was still married, and her husband, was eventually going to find us, which he did. He finally found us. And I was wondering how that was going to go, but he found us, and she explained to him she was done, that she wanted a divorce, and he wanted to know why. And so she told him that she was in love with me. She never actually wanted to marry him anyway. And and he was hurt in the beginning, but so he wanted her to come. He said, okay, we'll get divorced, but you got to come back up to Philadelphia with me to do the divorce. And you got to take some of the stuff out. You got to help me explain to my parents, for one thing. And you take some of the stuff in our apartment. She said, I don't want anything from the apartment. I don't want any money, and I don't want to go with you to Philadelphia. And he said, well, you got to do that. You got to do that to do the divorce papers. And she said, well, the only way I'm going to go to Philadelphia with you is if Don comes along. You want to know about a third wheel?
Awkward.
Awkward doesn't even begin to cover. I kind of wanted to go to New York City anyway, and I said, and so I said, well, okay, I'll go with you, and then I'll go on up to New York City. And so the whole way, we're going along. Pam's in the front seat and her husband's driving, and I'm in the back seat with my guitar. And Pam and I are holding hands around behind the seat on the side, and pretending that he couldn't tell what we were doing. And we got to Richmond, because this was in 1967, and we got to Richmond, and everything was on fire. There were buildings on fire, and there were cars turned over, and there were tires burning in the street, and we couldn't go on. There was no interstate. It was old Highway 1 back then. And we got stopped. We couldn't figure out what was going on. And we asked the cops when they came up to us, telling us that we couldn't go any further. They said, well, somebody killed Martin Luther King. And so it was the day that Martin Luther King got killed, got assassinated, and Richmond was burning. And we couldn't go forward and we couldn't go back. And so we managed to get a motel room. Now we're talking awkward. I mean, it's one thing to be riding in the car with Pam and her husband, but it's a whole different ballgame to be spending the night in the motel room with Pam and her husband and me. But we spent the night and didn't really sleep anyway. And nobody really spent much time in the bed. We just kept looking out the window and hoping nobody broke in, because there were gunshots going off outside and things were burning and people running around crazy. But we managed to make it through the night and go on up to Philadelphia. And I guess I could call that chapter 1, but it's not even a chapter. If you buy the book, and I hope you do, whoever's listening out there,
on Amazon.
On Amazon, you can get it on Amazon the first 60 days. There are no chapters. Amazon kind of busted me. Since it was published on Amazon, they have to review it when you put it up there. And that was one of the things they busted me. They said, no, we can't publish this because you don't have you're missing the table of contents. You need to put a table of contents in. And I wrote them back and I said, no, I don't want a table of contents on purpose, because it doesn't have it doesn't have chapters. It has dates, one date after the other, signifying which date it was written on. And so they said, okay, if that's what you want to do, but it needs to have a table of contents. Well, it doesn't. So there. And I don't feel bad about it. I think it stands like it is. So, I mean, that's only the first part of the book.
Then when did you get drafted and how did that all play out?
Oh yeah, chapter 2. Well, when we went to New York and stopped off in Philadelphia to drop Pam off, I stayed in Philadelphia until Pam signed the divorce papers. I wanted to be, or she wanted me to be there so that she didn't back out, and that it went smoothly. And so I stayed until the divorce papers were actually signed. Then they carried me to New York City to a friend of mine's house or apartment. And Pam ended up living with her for a little while. But in the meantime, I had gotten a draft notice. As this was happening, as this was actually going on, I received a draft notice because I had been one of the nights that Pam and I were singing at the coffee house, Esquire magazine, which I don't know, maybe nobody knows what that is now. But back in those days, there were two men's magazines, Playboy and Esquire. Playboy was mostly about soft porn, I guess. And Esquire was actually, I mean, there's plenty of that in there too, but Esquire had really intellectual writers. There was a lot of social commentary and interesting writers. And so Esquire had sent a reporter down to interview people about the kind of coffee houses that we were singing in there. And we got photographed and we got put in there in the magazine, which I did find that the other day too, when I was looking through stuff. But after that, they canceled and that was in the middle of my senior year. They canceled my 2S student deferment. They sent me a notice to report for a physical, and they sent me an actual induction notice all within 30 days. And I tried to appeal that, going, what are you doing? I mean, this is my senior year. I want to finish school and all this stuff. And I would complain. And it was like the lady at the draft office would go blank. Her eyes would just go blank, and like I wasn't there. And so I didn't have time to file papers for to avoid the draft or even contest it or anything else. So after they dropped me off in New York, shortly after that, I came back down to South Carolina to actually report for induction. And Pam then knew that was happening, and she began to live with this woman in New York City, one of my all-time mentors, Betty Butterworth, who deserves a whole book on her own. But she loved my music from the time I was 19 years old on, or 18 years old on. She liked the music I wrote. She liked the way I played and sang. And she was this wonderful old British woman. I say old now because she was in her 50s. To me now, that's a young person. But she was unlike anybody I had ever met before. She was this British woman who was an authentic woman of power. She didn't wear a dress. She wore slacks, and she wore a shirt, and she wore a little a neckerchief or an ascot and a hat. And she's very tan. She spent a lot of time outdoors, and she created her whole life in New York. She picked up and left London in her 50s and just started all over in New York City by herself. But she had fascinating stories to tell and stuff. So anyway, every time I'd go to New York, I would go to her apartment and play her whatever new song I was working on or anything like that. And so when Pam and those dropped me off, they dropped me off at her apartment. Pam and I sang a few songs there. And as Pam and her husband were leaving me there, Butterworth went up to Pam and said, "Oh, dearie, so what are you doing?" And she said, "Well, I'm going back. We're getting divorced." And she said, "Well, I can see that you're in love with Donnie, and I see that he's in love with you. So what are you going to do with the hubby?" And she said, "Well, we're getting a divorce." And she said, "Well, where are you going to live?" And she said, "I don't know, but I'm not going back to Columbia. In fact, I'm not even telling my parents I'm getting divorced. And so I don't know what I'm going to do." And Butterworth, who had never met Pam before, and she lived in a tiny little 4-flight walk-up rent control apartment in Manhattan, she said, "Well, how about this? How about if you come back, give me a couple weeks to clean this up so that you have a spot, and you come back and stay with me until you get on your feet." And Pam said, Why would you do that? I mean, I don't even know you." And she said, "Well, you love Donnie and I love Donnie and he loves you. So you must be a good person. So I would like to help you." Part of that was because, I mean, I figured out later, it was because she was such a feminist and a woman of power, and she recognized something in Pam. And so sure enough, a week later, her husband dropped her off at Butterworth's apartment with $100 and said, "Have a good life." And in the meantime, I was drafted. And by the time she got to New York, I was already in Fort Polk, Louisiana, in a whole different world. And that begins a whole different chapter right there. While I was in the Army and she was in New York, she was sort of ticked off at me anyway, because we were doing all this anti-war protest and all that. You know, we were at lots of protest marches and things, and going to Washington to protest the war in Vietnam. And then here I am being drafted in the Army. She wanted me to just go to jail or something, or run away, which I did try to do. I did try to run away. I don't think I put this in the book. But actually I tried to, after they let me out of New York, I hitchhiked on up to Quebec City in Canada, thinking, well, I'm just gonna, but that was in the wintertime. You ever been to Quebec City in the wintertime? It's cold, especially if you're from South Carolina. And I was confused. I come from an big Irish Catholic family. My uncle was the youngest prisoner of war returning from World War II. They're all patriotic and the first to volunteer to do anything. And so I was confused at that time. I was hearing stories that the war was not right. And at the same time, I was hearing stories from my family saying, well, this is your obligation. This is what we do as McMahon men. When we're called to serve, we go serve, and we go right up to the front. That's what we do. And so I was really confused. I didn't know. And so I went. I tried to leave and go to Canada, and it didn't feel right. More than being cold, it just didn't feel right in my heart and my soul. It just felt like I was running away rather than choosing one path or another. But I did go in the Army, and thinking, I had this plan, I had this thought that I'm smart enough, I can outwit the Army. I can figure out how to get through this without losing my mind. Well, all I can say is the United States military is really good at brainwashing and training people. And it became obvious real quickly that I was now becoming a soldier, and Pam was becoming more radicalized in New York. She was starting to participate in heavier anti-war demonstrations, and she was starting to hang out with Black Panthers and, the rowdier elements of the protest movement. And I, in the meantime, was becoming trained as a warrior. And we just kept going further and further apart, trying to maintain a long distance relationship when our ideologies were veering off in two different directions. So anyway, I'll cut through all of this, and I ended up getting deployed to Vietnam, and I never got any leave. I was just informed in the morning, one morning, that I was going to Vietnam. And from that point on, I was escorted by someone to make sure that all my paperwork got put together and that I actually got on the plane and got on the bus. And the next thing I knew, I was in Oakland, California, in this big processing station. And I called Pam and my parents and told them I was being deployed to Vietnam. Well, Pam was really angry about that. And my parents were shocked, and I guess I was shocked too. But the next thing I know, I'm actually in Vietnam. There was no opportunity to escape. And when I got to Vietnam, it had been 5 days since my mail had caught up with me. And when I finally got out to Cu Chi, which is one of the places I was going to be stationed, there was actually, there was machine gun fire and mortar fire going on outside, and we had to go down into this sandbag bunker. And my mail caught up with me. I was really excited. My mail finally got caught up with me. So I'm in there with a flashlight and these letters that I'm getting from home. And here's one from Pam. Oh boy, I was really excited. And I open it, and it was a Dear John letter. It was, and I'm not going to use the exact term that she used, but it was, to heck with you. I don't ever want to talk to you or see you again. I can't believe you did this. I'm now living with another guy in New York, so don't ever talk to me again. Well, that was my first night in Vietnam. And it was what I referred to as the dark night of the soul, because I was in some place that I couldn't get out of. It was not a nice place to be. The love of my life had basically just told me to, she didn't ever want to talk to me again. None of my friends wrote to me while I was there. And so I went into this real dark place. And the whole time I was there, I just got angry. That in my mind, it was just that, well, now all I have to do is survive to get out of here. And so I spent the entire year getting angrier and angrier and angrier with Pam and my parents and the draft lady and the president and everybody in the United States. I was getting madder and madder and madder. And toward the end, that was in February. And so I guess it was New Year's Eve. So it'd be the end of December is when I saw Pam on the little TV screen in Vietnam. So I was already kind of a month maybe or a little more from getting out of there. But I was reaching the pinnacle of rage, of just being so angry and so frustrated. It had to do with not only seeing Pam on the TV, but at the same time, I saw the president come on the TV and say unequivocally, we are not bombing in Cambodia. And I'm thinking, I just watched us bombing in Cambodia. And that just made me really angry, because I know he's telling my parents that. And I know it's a lie. It's just straight up lying. That seems to be the way of things. And I had also been there when Ho Chi Minh died. For those of you who don't know, Ho Chi Minh was the leader of the North Vietnamese. Really, he was the leader of all the Vietnamese, but he was the leader of the opposing army that I was with. And so the word had gone out that no Vietnamese were to express any sympathy or any acknowledgement of Ho Chi Minh's death. Well, I looked around, and every single Vietnamese person that I saw anywhere was wearing a black armband. And that they were wearing this black armband for the commander of the army that I wasn't in. And I realized back then, oh boy, I'm in the wrong place at the wrong time. And we really ought not be here. But anyway, I finally managed to make it out of there. But that little clip on the TV was part of the crescendo of my trip to Vietnam, to see Pam on the TV there. That's another chapter in the book. And when I got back, in fact, I was just talking to the Vietnam vet on the plane about this. He was several months behind me there. And so like I came back in February and he came back in like May or something of 1970. And he said, well, where'd you come back to? And I said, Oakland. And he said, so how was your reception? And it was awful, because in those days when you came back, when you were a returning veteran, you had to get off the plane and walk along, and there was a plywood barricade up, but there were people on the other side of the barricade yelling at you, that you were baby killers, and yelling, a lot of awful things, and throwing stuff over the fence, and spitting over. And he said, oh yeah, same thing happened to me coming into Oakland. And so that was the beginning of a whole other piece of this puzzle that's in the book. And when I was writing about it in the book, I wrote a lot of stuff that I don't even know how I remembered all this stuff, but it just kept coming out on the paper. And I kept thinking it's important to say this stuff. And it helps me get the grief of not only Pam's death, but the grief of all of that out at the same time. Start telling the truth. Somebody, please start telling the truth. And which went into after I finished the part that's in the book, why I kept going on, I started calling that eyewitness. To maintain authenticity and integrity. Those are my two words, to tell the truth and about what you know, about what you saw, or for me, what I saw and where I was and how I perceived it. And the other thing is acting, doing what you know is right, even when people aren't looking. And I hope that's what the whole book is about, and about dealing with your grief. Losing a partner, like with Pam, I'm still obviously dealing with this, and I will be the rest of my life. The rest of the time I have on this earth, I'm batting things around, trying to figure out. And I was telling Colleen when I was there, I went, and I don't even know exactly how I did this, but at the time it was still in the pandemic times, and because she died on February 22nd, so it's 2/22/22. And we had been doing these online concerts our local community co-op had these things called hootenannies. That was just a thing for us to get together and get other people to sing. You know, I would play and Pam and I would sing, and we had a couple other guitar players and stuff that would play too. And so there was one scheduled 6 days after Pam's death. And they called me up and they said, "Oh, you don't have to do this. You really don't have to." And I said, no, I need to do this. I have to do this. So 6 days after her death, I went and played this concert, which is actually, I mean, it's still out there on Pam's page. If you want to look back through the videos, that particular concert, it was just 6 days after her death. And I was in shock. I was in total shock. I was not sleeping at all, but I knew the music always helps me, that while I'm playing the music, I can feel the connection to God. When I'm playing, I can feel the connection to God. And in a weird sort of way, I could feel the connection to Pam. I could still hear her, even though she wasn't there. I could hear her in the music in my mind. So I had to do that. And then when they called me about the Reiki retreat, which was going to be basically 6 months after she died, she was scheduled to do a breathwork presentation. She'd been trying to get to do a breathwork presentation for 15 years or more, and didn't understand how to go about it or something, but she couldn't seem to get on the bill to do the breathwork presentation. And so last year, she was scheduled to do a breathwork workshop. And so Michael called me and said, "Listen, I know this is a weird time. We would like you to come to the retreat, or not, if you don't want to, and you can sing or not, anything that you want to do. You can do however much or however little you want to do. We just want you to be there." And again, I felt it not like an obligation. I don't want it to sound like it was an obligation, because it's not that, but I felt this need to go and do Pam's breath workshop, and the need to go and do the opening and closing and the concert and the gratitude ceremony. Those are things that meant a lot to Pam, and they mean a lot to me too. And I knew it was going to be emotional. I knew it was going to be hard, but it needed to be done. It absolutely I needed it to be done. And in the doing of it, I realized that a whole bunch of other people needed for it to be done as well. And I could feel that come back, and it was very difficult. And when I went back this year, now that's been a year and a half, I'm no longer, I don't think, in shock. And the words that I used, and I know you'll remember it, Colleen, because I was telling you, I'm just dazed and confused and disoriented still. Still trying to get my head around who I am, what I'm doing, and what this all means, if it means anything. And this year turned out to be harder for me emotionally and professionally, if I can say it that way, because the music thing is I can do professionally. I can stand aside, and my emotions, I can sort of set them over here, and I can do the music thing because I've done that all my life. But then when I'm not doing that, the weight of it and the intensity of the emotion sweeps in and carries me away. And then I become an emotional basket case for a while, until I get it together, and I do, to be able to go on out and move on to the next thing. This is, I hope, one of my hopes in writing the book, or in releasing the book, is that it does help people in some way to process their grief. And I know I've had a number of calls from veterans, and from more particularly veterans' wives, who have told me that the segment on how I dealt with the trauma of military service from those days has helped them as a family. And I can't say that a lot of the veterans have actually read it yet. I've had a few that send me back something and say my wife or my girlfriend made me read this, and I didn't want to read it, but then I got started, and here it is midnight, and I'm sending you a message because I couldn't stop. I read it all the way through in one sitting. I could not stop. So thank you. Those kind of comments make me feel that it's worth it to open the code, let you see everything that's in here, everything. I tried not to hold anything at all back. And I'll say again, I think it's important for all of us to start to do that, to start to really be open and honest and trust that there are other people out there that need to hear what our experience is. Music. We have CDs. Now, I am still in the process of converting the website over from what Pam had done with it into a place where I can sell our CDs and sell our books from the website. It's not done yet, but I can still receive emails at Dawn at Heartspace. And there's still stuff up on Heartspace. It's just not, it's in process into what it's going to be soon here, as soon as I can get it finished. The music I took off of Apple and all that. It just cost too much to have it up there. And everything I made went back to pay the people to put it up there. So I took it off of there. And the only way you can get it now is to write me an email, and I'll send some to you. Same thing with ordering the book. You can order it from Amazon. You can also order it from me. And I'm looking at a pile of packing materials over here now. I'm trying to figure out how to do this part. I've told everybody, I did everything I could because I was being pressed. I swear I could hear Pam telling me, you need to finish it. Don't leave it hanging out there. Go ahead and finish it and put it out there. And so I did. I pressed through. I did that. And then I got back this box of books, and I looked at them. And I said, okay, what do I do now? I don't know how to market things, and I didn't even know how to mail things. Pam did all that stuff. And so now I've gone out and I've gotten some shipping materials, and I've shipped out quite a few books now, and I'm learning how to do that. But that's how you get this stuff. And then the big thing is the Facebook page, Pam's Facebook page. Yeah. That's the most active thing that I do. I try to post something. I can't do it every day because life happens, but I try and do it almost every day. I try and post something about what's going on, what I think about something, or another story. There's an endless amount of stories out here. So here we are.
Well, we definitely have to call this part 1 or just chapter 1 and come back, because we left it back in the 1960s, and there's so much between then and now. And again, just, your story of your early years and living in a bus and
the hearse,
4 children, and
the hearse, the time period of the hearse.
Yep, the time period of the hearse, and Earl, and their peace gatherings, and
one of the things that a whole bunch of people have mentioned since I have it is Pam's picture, 9 months pregnant in the red string bikini.
Yes, I saw that. I was looking at it today.
I've gotten a lot of comments about that. And actually, I saw a pregnant lady on the plane coming back, and she was probably close to 9 months pregnant, and she and her husband were really funny in the way they were dealing with it, and we were laughing, and I was telling her how nice she looked and stuff, and I said, I've got a picture of my wife in a string bikini. She was 9 months pregnant. Yeah, that's it.
That's the one.
And I was actually looking for one. There's another one of her riding a bicycle with that on probably same day or day after or something, that I thought was really good, but I couldn't find that picture, so I had to use that one. The pictures are good. For anybody who's listening in Australia, I don't think you can get it in Australia or Japan because it has colored pictures inside and they won't
Oh.
print. For some reason, they won't print color picture books in Australia or Japan for Amazon. So,
Well, they'll have to go to your Facebook page and
wait,
not as well collected there, where I'm sure it's like the book is such a nice, just flows. But they could go to your Facebook page to
yeah,
at least
Here's
get a
your
good
young
look.
family. You guys as a young family. I think you were in Hawaii at this time.
I think that's in Hawaii. Yes.
Yeah.
Mm.
So we have to come back and continue your story. I know you've been talking for a long time and it's, you're probably ready for a break, but we want to continue your story and Pam's story. And again, you just touch our hearts. And, this is a Reiki podcast and just even your voice sharing that vibration and frequency comes through in your beautiful life lived.
Thank you. And I haven't even gotten to the Reiki part yet.
No,
Yeah.
we haven't gotten to a lot, Don.
Oh, I know. That's only the very, very first part. It's such it's such a story. It is so hard for me to tell it in short little things because it does get intense. It's an intense read for anybody who's interested. It's a really intense read, but it's so good. My son Jesse and I went back at something I had written not long ago, and I got a lot of comments, and they said, "This has to be please put this in the second book. Please put this in the second book. This has got to be in the second book." And so I was going, "Wow, I wonder what that was." And so I went back and read it, and I think it was one about hands or something. And I read it, and it was really good. I was amazed at how good it was. My son was reading over, and he said, "Boy, that's really good, Pop." And then I looked at one particular sentence in there, and I thought, "Geez." And I asked myself, who is writing this? And I've heard authors before say, "I didn't write the book wrote itself." And I never really, I was going, "Oh, yeah, right." Well, now I kind of get it because I don't feel like I actually wrote this. I think it wrote itself through me. And now that I've had a chance to go back and read it, I realized, it actually is good, and it has a lot of good information and a lot of good things for people to utilize in their lives. There is Reiki in it later on.
Well, and all the way through. And it's a story that needs to be told because really you lived a historical life. And, we just touched the first little bit today. And,
Well,
I think of even that young man on that first night in Vietnam, and it's like,
oh, it still is emotional to me to this day. It is emotional. Now, I would like to say, though, that if anybody does buy the book on Amazon, or even if you don't, please go to Amazon and write a review and at least give me some stars, because the important thing for me now is, there are a lot of people that know Pam and I, and they're reading the book. But I believe there's enough value in it, enough service that it can give and has to offer, that it needs to get into the hands of people that don't know me and don't know Pam. And the only way that can happen is through Amazon, or unless word of mouth, and there are people like the woman who, like the veterans guys that write me and say, "My wife or my girlfriend made me read this book." Well, that's one way of spreading it. But with Amazon, there's access to a really broad spectrum of humanity. And the only way it gets any further than it is now is if people actually go out there and write a review and give it some stars to push it along, and get Amazon to recommend it to people who don't know us
and are grieving.
Yeah.
And are grieving.
Yeah.
Or a good love story.
Or I was going to say, or just wants to read a good love story, because it's just a phenomenal love story.
or veterans processing, or PTSD processing. There's a lot good in there.
Yeah.
I'm really happy with it. So I would really like it if lots of your readers would go buy it and write a review.
Yeah.
Well, and you can find it on Amazon, and the title of it is The First 60 Days, a Memorial of Eternal Love and the Grief That Follows, by Donald T. McMahon. And again, McMahon is McMahon. You can find his Facebook page at Pam McMahon, last name spelled the same. And you can email him at dawn@heartspace.com. All right. Well,
And
Donald
next,
T.
we're going to schedule another time.
Yep,
with you
thank
to
you
be
so much. Yeah, we
continued.
you left us on a cliffhanger there, because we haven't heard how you and Pam get back together at this time. So people have to go read the book. They have to read the book, but then also, and there's lots of details in the posts that weren't talked about today too. So if you go and read the book, you get even more information. But yeah, we have to have you back on, because they're like, wait, you left us off at us not getting back together. And I think that's perfect. It's so perfect.
I would love to. And I at some point, outside of the book and outside of my life, I would really like to talk about both breath work and Reiki, how we use it and why we used it, and how it worked with people.
So there was a cancellation as one of the presenters. They couldn't make it. One of the presenters at the retreat, and I did get to take a breathwork class with Pam there.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah.
And he'll be doing the breath work presentation next year, 2024, at the Sedona Reiki retreat. We already have that planned.
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much, Dawn.
Thank you.
And with Colleen and I, of
love.
course, you can reach us at reikilifestyle.com.
I love you guys.
Oh, we love you too.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And again, we'll be back.
We'll be back.
Yes.